Good morning, Tevita. You've spoken many times to us about the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss in Fiji and the impacts on the way of life for people and all creation. And I hope to change people's perspectives. Are you able to say a little bit more about that?
Thank you, Mbulabinak, Caroline. It's a good afternoon here from Fiji. Thank you for bringing up that topic on the perspective of changing people's lives. The issue that we are trying to highlight and promote is on biodiversity. The connection between the various forms of life and how it affects us. And that is also connected with climate change. Here in the Pacific, those are the two fundamental issues, and in the Oceania region that all the Oceania countries are facing now, the effects of climate change and how it affects all life and all webs of life, including human beings. In the previous video, we were highlighting the impacts of development, especially tourism, infrastructural development on ecosystem, because where development takes place, it takes place in a very dynamic, vulnerable, yet also very important ecosystems like mangroves, foreshore, and Fiji in its young and growing economy, it needs to make money. In this, it uses its natural resources and beauty. So tourism is one of, is not one, is the main income driver here in Fiji. And that's why development always come in contact with nature. And especially where nature is so beautiful, it's so vulnerable, like the beaches, mangroves, foreshore lines, reefs, mountains, streams. And this is where development takes place for tourism and ecotourism businesses. And it affects wildlife and environmental life that we depend on. And that's the issue that we bring in. How can we bring in development, which we need for economic development, while at the same time be very careful that it does not affect drastically and impact or change the way we live and change the way other animals and organisms live, or even destroy them in the process.
Thank you. Very profound. And I'm just struck by the fact that you are so close to all of this, and people are experiencing, the impacts. But I think I just sort of wonder, many people probably don't even realise what you're sharing is actually happening. And when we think about tourism, we think about going to beautiful places, as you've shared, and you've got a really vital message to share, that people need to understand the vulnerability.
Yes, thank you for that. Like I said before, our beauty is our vulnerability, while it's also a source of strength. Because when we market Fiji, it markets its beauty, and that's where it's vulnerable. Because people come to use this beauty for their joy and fulfillment at the expense of what gives that beauty, the environment and the organisms that live within. It's good to understand it from an ecological and theological point of view too, and also with the indigenous people, because when they see a tree, a flower, the sea, sand, a rock, they see life. That's totally different when you see a white sandy beach, coconut, waves and breeze. That's beautiful. They see money and people coming in. But to indigenous people and local people, they see that as life. They see them as part of themselves. They see that as their everyday. They see them as that is themselves, because that is what they use, they live with, and that's what they will depend on which they have depended on from the past. They will be using it now, and they will also share that with their future for tomorrow. So those two concepts are different, and also how they are used. For local people, they use it, they take what they need just for now. They will take for the evening, they will fish for the evening, and that's it. And tomorrow they will go again. So in that way, they take only as much as you can use for only one time. But for the other one, you take as much as you can use, now while you have it. And that's why it's extractive. And in a sense, tourism is extractive in that way. It takes away, because leases are granted for almost 100 years. So when you build over a mangrove or a beachfront, after 100 years of use, it's almost impossible to return that same landscape into its original form, unless if you leave it for another 200 years for natural process to take its own course, so it can rehabilitate itself. So that's the point of understanding the different way organisms live and how people live and they are interdependent on each other. So I believe whatever we do, whatever we do affects how the other organisms, how the air, the sea reacts, and that's how it changes the whole system of our climate, and it comes back to us. And in that way, it affects every single part of our life, especially if we live in the Oceania region, because all form and life began from the sea. And just like our Christianity here in Fiji, it comes from across the sea. The missionaries come from across the sea, landed on this shore. And so did God in the beginning. There was nothing but the sea, and he created everything out of the sea. And it was dull and void, but was the sea. And it's important that we are talking about this on Earth Day, that protecting our environment and our Earth, we need to look at what's in and on the sea, because it's what that surrounds and covers the Earth, because it is 3/4 of all the Earth is.
Thank you so much. A different way of seeing and knowing, Tevita, you share with us. Another way of seeing and knowing is really important, Tevita, and are you able to say a little bit more about what we need to do?
Yes, I think that's where the concept of traditional knowledge, I think traditional knowledge applies to every one of us. It's just knowing how things ought to be and how to be as it was intended to be. That's what traditional knowledge is, how God created it to be. He meant it to be good. He saw it was good, and he meant it to be good. And that's how we should keep the earth. We intend, if we use it, we use it for the common good, like Pope Francis said, so that it's good for all other organisms, all other fish and animal and birds, and also good for human beings. And because in that way, it's not a one way. You will just come and take what is good for them, good to make money. Money is not bad. We need money to build up the economy, but it's good for only for one the other party. So understanding is important. So how do we understand these things? We understand this through experiences lived. That's why Indigenous principles and way of living is important, because they have been there for thousands of years, trials and error, and they have learned to live with that particular environment, and they have learned to live it sustainably and continue to. So that's understanding the way of life. It's important, and it's good to listen. I think listening is very, very important, and dialogue. When we need to do something, we need to, at least before we speak, we listen. Take a moment and just be. So that's why reflection is important. Before I do something, just reflect in its original place. How is this tree, if I remove this beautiful flowering tree and put a pine post or a bracket cement here, what change will it bring? And just to be as it's meant to be is an important state. So that brings in our theological foundation. and how God intended it to be. I think for us here for Indigenous people, they perceived God, they knew God through what was around them. Every part of the Indigenous life in Fiji, we are identified by trees, by birds, by the sea, by stones, by creatures that even goes back to God. So I confer with what Saint Columbans said: to know the Creator is to know creation, and that's what Indigenous people really they knew God through creation, and this is another way and the best way to use our environment and creation.